Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin. Well, I'm going to cover two areas on tonight's program. Number one, Kamala Harris. Who is she exactly? Not what the media say she is, but who is she? And number two, the media coverage of the Harris-Biden announcement and how the media is going to play a role in this campaign. First of all, let's take a quick look at her record since she's been a United States Senator. And I want you to think, as I go through this list that I made today, each and every one of these items, how radical it is and how wrenching it would be to our society. She is farther left than 97% of the Democrats in the United States Senate. She is left of avowed Marxist, Democratic Socialist, Bernie Sanders. She's not moderate. She's not a pragmatist like the New York Times and the others are trying to tell you. She would decriminalize illegal immigration. Decriminalize illegal immigration. She rejects a physical wall on the southern border. She compared the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Service, the men and women in federal law enforcement who, once people come here illegally, they commit crimes and other things, they try and get them and deport them. She compared them to the Ku Klux Klan. She believes in government-run health care for illegal aliens. Imagine what that will do to health care. She believes in the elimination of private health care. Many of you have private health care. Many of you have private health care through your employer or through your union. That means 160 million people would lose their health care. She is a co-sponsor with AOC of the Green New Deal. What is the Green New Deal? To put it simply, it started in Europe. It is a socialist attack on capitalism. It would affect everything from automobiles and homes, heating and air conditioning, the kind of paint you use, everything the federal government will regulate. Everything. In other words, it's a war on capitalism. She wants to attack energy independence after all these decades, where we're finally free of foreign countries and blackmail from OPEC and all the rest of it because of American ingenuity and the hard work of the American people. She wants to eventually eliminate, in short order, coal, oil, natural gas, all fossil fuels, and eliminate fracking. She wants to repeal the president's tax cuts for the middle class. She wants to massively increase taxes on all Americans. She supports infanticide, and even more, she believes you, the American taxpayer, regardless of your religion, regardless of your moral views, that you should pay for it. Abortion on demand, abortion as late as is demanded. She believes the federal government should have to approve any state law that seeks to regulate abortion in any way before a state could actually implement it. She wants to ban what are today legal firearms by executive order in clear violation of the Second Amendment. She wants massive new regulations across the board. She supports Joe Biden's war on the suburbs, Obama's war on the suburbs, where the Housing and Urban Development would basically decide all issues for the suburbs, where libraries would be, how many schools there are, whether you can have single-family homes, and on and on and on. She has said that she supports, if necessary, quote unquote, the packing of the United States Supreme Court. And she believes in eliminating the filibuster. Now, any one of these things would be destructive to our constitutional system, to our economic system, to your liberty, and to your community. Any one of these things. Does that sound like a pragmatic moderate to you, ladies and gentlemen? That sounds like the most extremist, radical politician ever to run for high office in the United States of America. It is about as clear of an un-American, anti-capitalist, anti-individual, anti-constitution agenda as one has ever stated. But what about Kamala Harris when she was district attorney? What about Kamala Harris when she was attorney general of California? What's happening is the media and the Democrats are citing that as an example to show that she's a moderate. Well, I have a man who's been tracking this for some time. His name is Mark Levin. He's a Law and Liberty contributing editor. He's written extensively about this, and he knows quite a bit about Kamala Harris and her role as district attorney and as Attorney General of California. Mark, how are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming. I looked at her record. I've looked at some of what you've written, and I want you to go through it. I wouldn't say that's a record of a moderate. I would say that's a record of an autocrat and an opportunist trying to claw her way up the ladder in San Francisco and California. Can you break down some major aspects of her record back in California, please?
Sure. I think these days, in the age of the resistance, particularly among presidential aspirants in the Democratic Party, almost everybody espouses this type of hyper-progressive rhetoric. But in her case, if you go back to her track record from when she started her political career in California, you can see very disturbing signs that she really believes these things and that she has acted in the past consistently with these beliefs. She was plucked from relative obscurity as a deputy district attorney in Alameda County when Willie Brown, whom she was dating at age 29, Willie Brown being 60 and married at the time, and for the 2 years that they were in a relationship, he introduced her to the political circles that have led to her meteoric rise since then, appointed her to a couple of cushy administrative agencies positions in California that paid her over $400,000. And at the time, he was Speaker of the California Assembly, which made him really the most powerful politician in California. He was a very crafty, very savvy, very ruthless, very partisan Democrat. And she obviously learned the ropes. When, due to term limits, he was forced out as Speaker, he ran for and became mayor of San Francisco. And that's really where her political career began, when she ran for district attorney. She's only had two challenged, difficult political races. The first one was when she ran in 2003 for district attorney in San Francisco against an incumbent. Ironically, she had the support of the police officers there, because the incumbent whom she was running against had made the mistake of indicting the president of the police union and 8 of his high-level officials, and ended up getting no convictions out of that. So the police were supporting her, and she was able to defeat him. But almost immediately, she showed her true colors. There was a San Francisco police officer named Isaac Espinoza who was ambushed by a gang member, shot down in cold blood with an AK-47, and Kamala Harris, who had run with a personal opposition to the death penalty, announced 3 days after this killing, before the police officer had even been buried, that she would not seek the death penalty against the killer. And this outraged people. It outraged even the Democratic community in California, which is a one-party state. The Attorney General at the time, Bill Lockyer, disagreed with it. Dianne Feinstein disagreed with it. Dianne Feinstein was so upset, she said, I wouldn't have endorsed her for district attorney if I'd known that she would do something like this. Barbara Boxer, who was still in the Senate at the time, disagreed with it and said that she disagreed with it so much she was urging the federal prosecutors to prosecute this gang member under federal law. And the police union, needless to say, was aghast. So this is the kind of prosecutor that she is, one who has such contempt for law enforcement that she would refuse to seek the death penalty for a cop killer. And this wasn't an isolated example. 5 years later, she did the same thing in San Francisco. A MS-13 illegal alien murdered a father and his 2 sons who were returning from a picnic, and she announced that she wasn't going to seek the death penalty against them either. However, once she got in as district attorney, the machine politics took over, and she was reelected in that position without any opposition. But clearly her sights were on higher office, and in 2010 she ran for Attorney General.
Let me ask you another question about her DA position. There's also, as I read, a case involving the molestation of several individuals by certain priests in the jurisdiction there. Do you want to fill us in about that?
Well, this is a controversy about something she didn't do. This is while in many jurisdictions priests were being prosecuted for molestation, there were active cases that her predecessor, Terrence Hallinan, had begun, but none of those were prosecuted during the time that she was district attorney in San Francisco. So this is a matter of setting her priorities, and going after priests was not part of that priority, perhaps because some of these churches were where these priests were associated with this political establishment in San Francisco. This is the city of Nancy Pelosi and other people who profess to be Catholics, and she didn't want to step on toes. This is Willie Brown 101. You reward your friends and you punish your enemies.
Yeah, because I saw one of the gentlemen who was a very young kid who was brutally raped repeatedly by two priests. The district attorney who she defeated, the incumbent, was gathering all the documentation and was prepared to bring some major charges. And he has since said that she refused to bring charges. She refused to talk to him directly. And they basically got rid of the documentation and nothing came of it.
And the hypocrisy is she claims that as a prosecutor in initially Alameda County and then later in San Francisco, that her emphasis was on helping victims of child abuse. But we see that when she actually had the power to do something, she didn't.
Well, in that case, she definitely took a pass, and you might even say it was a cover-up. I'm sure the New York Times and the Washington Post will get right on top of that. When we come back, I'm going to take a look at her record as Attorney General of the state of California. We'll be right back. Kamala Harris, this is your life. Not the spin and the narrative of the New York Times and the Washington Post, but your actual record. As Attorney General of the state of California, Mark Levin, who is the contributing editor for Law and Liberty. Mark, well, tell us about some of her actions or non-actions as Attorney General of California.
In 2016, I wrote a long article for City Journal, which was a profile of Kamala Harris while she was running for the Senate, but before she got elected. And I looked at a number of her things that she did and didn't do when she was Attorney General. And some of the most controversial things that she did, and the things that I think are most indicative of her true character, are, for instance, she refused to defend Proposition 8 on appeal. Proposition 8 was a California initiative that had declared marriage to be a union of one man and one woman. And following the lead of her predecessor as Attorney General, Jerry Brown, she refused to defend this state law, contrary to her oath, on appeal. And lo and behold, this initiative was forced to be defended by its proponents. And they defended it. When it got to the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court said that the proponents did not have legal standing to defend it, and that therefore the appeal was invalid, and sent it back, where, of course, Prop 8 lost because Vaughn Walker, a biased judge in San Francisco, had ruled against it. So Kamala Harris, by her refusal to defend a state law, sabotaged the will of the people, which is, I think, a tremendous violation of her oath. Another thing that she did as Attorney General, she was responsible for crafting the language of ballot measures. And in California, we have a lot of initiatives. And this is how people are able to get things on the ballot and enact laws. And but she's the gatekeeper. She's the one that decides how the ballot summary will read. And she used her power as the gatekeeper to distort laws, so that laws that would, let's say, restrict the power and influence of public employee unions were calculated to fail, but laws or initiatives that were being sponsored by trial lawyers, which were an ally of the Democratic Party, she would do everything she could, including deceptive characterizations of what the initiative was about, to try to make those pass. Fortunately, one example where the trial lawyers were trying to trying to have a cap removed on non-economic damages and medical malpractice, that initiative failed, even though she falsely characterized it. Another thing she did as Attorney General, she had the power to approve the sales of nonprofit assets. And as she was approaching her bid for Senate, and she desperately needed the endorsements of public employee unions, she held the sale of a financially distressed chain of hospitals hostage, because even though this hospitals chain was losing $10 million a month and desperately needed to take measures to turn it around, the unions representing the employees did not want any changes, and they got Kamala Harris to impose 300 conditions that the buyer of this hospital chain would be required to adopt as a condition of sale, even though they were willing to pay $843 million for this chain of hospitals. And as a result of this high-handed conditions that she imposed, the sale faltered. So she has shown herself as Attorney General to be basically an agent for the special interests, and she has used everything at her disposal to reward friends and punish enemies. It is not the track record of a moderate, and certainly not even the track record of an honorable prosecutor. She is supposed to be the chief law enforcement officer of the state of California, and yet she was very reluctant to defend the death penalty when a federal judge declared it unconstitutional. She is no friend of the police. She imposed implicit bias training on police in California, one of the first states to do so. She has been a tremendous disappointment. There was a ballot measure that was opposed by every law enforcement agency in California and virtually all of the county district attorneys that would have retroactively revised many felonies and turned them into misdemeanors, which would have the effect of letting thousands of convicted felons out of prison. This initiative was opposed, and she refused to take a position. And even though she had the bully pulpit and could have turned it around, this initiative unfortunately passed, and thousands of criminals were released, and the crime rate went up. She was a disaster.
She also went after the nonprofit organization that exposed Planned Parenthood and what Planned Parenthood was doing with the harvesting and selling of baby body parts. And she also joined with the most leftist of the Democrat attorneys general in the country to go after Exxon with bogus claims against Exxon, claiming that their press releases and other opposition to the notion of climate change, quote unquote, was deceiving to the public, deceiving to investors, and therefore a criminal act and a criminal enterprise. The point being, as you point out, and there's even plenty more information, she used her position as Attorney General of California in the most political way possible, to reward her friends, to punish her enemies, to advance a political agenda in so many respects. And then we have the case where she was prosecuting marijuana violations, relatively minor marijuana violations, and then she's interviewed a year or so ago while she's running for president. She laughs over the fact that she used marijuana. She went after parents, truants, and sometimes you have tough kids, and sometimes parents, as much as they may try to control a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old who's going to high school and so forth, she was charging them to try and put them in jail too, and making lots of great headlines and so forth. So I think the picture you paint, and the picture her record paints, is not of somebody who has a good temperament, somebody who was a straight shooter. It's somebody who abused her power and used her office as Attorney General of California with honey and with a stick, and always in mind for her next position in office. And I think we see that as the 2 years in the Senate, where she's embraced every radical kook idea as a co-sponsor, as a promoter, where she has been enormously vicious, an absolute Spiro Agnew-type character assassin when it comes to Kavanaugh. I think we're going to see that also when it comes to the President of the United States, that Biden will pretty much be in his basement, and she'll be out there as the attack dog. Mark Pulliam, I want to thank you, contributing editor of Law and Liberty. Keep up the good work. Keep informing the American people about what you know about Kamala Harris. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mark.
We'll be right back.